We're broadcasting from the 21st COP, Conference of Parties, United Nations Climate Summit here in Paris, France. The first week of talks is wrapping up. Nearly 150 world leaders gathered here earlier this week. On Monday, President Obama praised fellow world leaders for submitting voluntary pledges to cut greenhouse gas emissions.
Already, prior to Paris, more than 180 countries representing nearly 95% of global emissions have put forward their own climate targets. That is progress. For our part, America is on track to reach the emissions targets that I set 6 years ago in Copenhagen. We will reduce our carbon emissions in the range of 17% below 2005 levels by 2020. And that's why last year I set a new target. America will reduce our emissions 26 to 28% below 2005 levels within 10 years from now. So our task here in Paris is to turn these achievements into an enduring framework for human progress. Not a stopgap solution, but a long-term strategy that gives the world confidence in a low-carbon future.
While more than 180 nations have pledged to voluntarily reduce emissions, many scientists say far more needs to be done to keep global warming in check. We're joined now by two guests. Paul Oquist is Nicaragua's chief climate negotiator. Nicaragua is one of 11 countries not to submit a pledge to cut emissions. Also with us is Mina Rahman, climate change coordinator for the Third World Network. She's also honorary secretary of Friends of the Earth, Malaysia. We welcome you both to Democracy Now!
Thank you.
So, Mr. Paul Oquist, what is happening here? Why is Nicaragua not participating? Why didn't you submit voluntary standards for your country?
Because the concept of universal responsibility and voluntary commitments doesn't work. Universal responsibility is a spin. It's a spin on historical responsibility and common but differentiated responsibilities. The first proof that INDC doesn't work is
Wait, just one second. These terms are terms 99% of the world won't understand.
These voluntary commitments don't work.
Even common and differentiated is a term that is not commonly used.
Okay, but let's say that the voluntary commitments, that the universal responsibility, everyone's responsible, is a spin on historical responsibility, because everyone didn't create this problem. Nicaragua has 4.8 million tons of emissions a year, and that's 0.03% of emissions. Do we feel responsible for having caused climate change? No, not at all. Have we doing something about it? Yes. We've gone from 25% renewable to 52% renewable since 2007, and in 2020 we'll be 90% renewable.
Can you explain for a moment, when you say you're going to 90%, what are you changing? What's happening in Nicaragua?
We have a contract with a Brazilian consortium for 323 megawatts of hydroelectric that will take us to 90. There's some smaller projects also. But we went from 25 to 52% with geothermal power from the volcanoes, wind power, and now sun power, because the solar panels are kicking in too. Last year, we had a saving of 2.1 million tons of CO2 because of our shift to renewable energy. And our actual emissions were 4.8, so it's quite significant. Plus, we've committed to 11 million tons in our forestry sector that we will cut in the next 5 years. So that's over 2 years of emissions. And the Grand Interoceanic Canal that we're building represents 32.5 million tons per year of saving for the maritime commerce. So really, Nicaragua's house is in order in terms of mitigation, but we're on planet Earth, and we have to keep this genie in the bottle. We have to achieve the objective of 1.5 degree increase in this century, or at worst, the 2 degrees. And what does this process in Paris lead to? 3 degrees. And 3 degrees in our countries...
You're talking about Celsius.
Celsius, exactly. 3 degrees Celsius. And 3 degrees Celsius is not acceptable. 3 degrees Celsius is a disaster. It's catastrophic. So we think that we have to get out of this spin and back to where the problem can be solved. 10 countries, Amy, have 72% of the emissions. 10 countries.
In the world.
In the world. 20 countries have 78%. So you can see it's only 72 to 78, adding 10 more on. But they have also 76% of the world's gross income. 100 countries have 3%.
So wait, you're saying they have that much of the world's gross income so they can afford?
They can afford it, and they're the ones who have the CO2 that can be cut. So 100 countries, the 100 lowest countries, have 3% of the CO2 emissions. The 20 largest have 78% of the CO2 emissions. Are we going to try to cut out of the 100 countries with 3% or out of the 20 countries with 78%? Or even maybe just the 10 countries with 72%.
So clearly one of the countries you're talking about is the United States. What do you think the United States should do, the historically largest emitter of greenhouse gas?
Well, China has over 10,000 million tons. The United States has over 6,000 million tons. Europe has over 4,000 million tons. The three of them are half. They're half. So they need to increase their level of ambition if we're going to solve this problem. There's no solution without them increasing their level of ambition. And right now...
And what is that when you say level of ambition? Ambition's a big term here, but what do you want them to do?
They cut their CO2 and other greenhouse gas emissions more, to reforest and get more sinks through forestry and bamboo and other ways of the CO2 sinks. And then fuel efficiency is another thing that can be done. But their contributions, their commitments are not enough to limit to 2 degrees. Right now, we're looking at a 3-degree world, and that is catastrophic and unacceptable. I would just like to point out that last week, Mr. Michel Jourot, the executive director of the World Meteorological Organization, stated that we've reached 1 degree above the pre-industrial level. We have 400 parts per million of greenhouse gases. And at 1 degree, what do we have? We have all of the ice in the world melting, the Arctic, the Antarctic, Greenland, mountain glaciers. We have drought, 4-year droughts in California and southern United States, in southern Iberia, southern Africa, southern Australia. You can see a pattern there, the southern edges. We have the strongest Nino in years, one of the 4 strongest since 1950, which is bringing drought to some areas and floods to others. And they also tell us that this is the hottest year ever, 2050. This is at 1 degree. So are we going to play roulette with the world's future and let 3 degrees slip out of this Paris Congress?
And just to be clear, 3 degrees Celsius is what, about 5.6 degrees Fahrenheit?
That's right.